Hi everyone, my name is Ameera Natasha Moore, and I'll be covering today's lecture on Judging 101. In today's lecture, we'll be covering 3 chapters. Number 1, how to evaluate debates. Number 2, how to track those debates, i.e. note-taking. And number 3, how to eventually give an oral adjudication. So without wasting any more time, let's jump straight into chapter 1, which is how to view debates. Now in this chapter, the first thing you want to take note of is being able to track all of the claims that the debaters have said in the round. This means that you're taking notice of all of the positive material, whether they are actual arguments, whether they are framing, rebuttals, impacts, mechanization, any type of positive contribution to the round ought to be recognized and jotted down. This is important because you will not be able to judge the debate as it is if you are not doing the basics of taking notice of what is actually being said by the debaters in the round. So that's like the first and foremost basic thing to take note of. The second thing you want to do when it comes to evaluating and viewing how the debate happened is to then identify the issues. Because once you are able to track down all of the positive contribution that teams have been making, you will then be able to see what are the important issues that debaters are explicitly or implicitly hinting at. This will then give you an idea of what the key clashes or the core issues of the round are, or the bigger questions in the debate, right? They're all eventually leading to the same thing, which is understanding what are we trying to resolve in this debate here today. So that's the second thing, which is being able to identify what those issues are by extracting it from your understanding of everything that has been said by the debaters. The third thing you want to do when it comes to viewing debates is when you look at all of the positive contribution that teams have made, you are now not only looking at the arguments that have been made, and you are no longer just looking at the issues that have been brought up in the round, but you are now looking at how those issues and how those arguments are interacting with each other, which will then eventually lead you to be able to prioritize and rank the issues according to importance. This is why when judges are deliberating and deciding on the win of a round, we are not doing it based on who won how many issues or who won the most arguments in the round, but rather who was able to answer the important questions in the round the most. This is why you will hear certain oral adjudications that say, while Team A won 1 issue, but Team B won 2 issues, Team A still ended up winning, right? So let's say in this case, opening government versus closing government, right? Opening government, they've managed to sell like a lot of the foundational arguments that were eventually carried throughout the entire debate. Closing government comes in and brings in new issues, and in fact we're more like versatile in some ways with issue 2 and issue 3. That does not necessarily tell us that closing government is eventually going to rank higher in comparison to opening government, because now this is where you then have to decipher what is the ranking of the issues that were won. So it may still be the case that opening government takes it over closing government because of the importance of the issues, not necessarily because of the number of issues. So that's the third thing to take note of. And at this juncture, this is why it's important to acknowledge that judges, we not only need to know what the argument is, but how that argument eventually plays out in light of all the other arguments that debaters have presented in the round. The fourth thing you then want to look at is, after looking at the claims, identifying the issues, and then ranking the issues, is number 4, to look at who was able to answer those issues, right? And then eventually you will then find yourself at step number 5, which is deciding who won the debate. So that's just on how to view debates in general. And I think it's important to note here in terms of when you're looking at the claims of debaters, I think this is where we kind of go back to like argument development 101, which is understanding what is the claim that the team is making? What is the premise of this team? What is the reason to believe that this premise is true? What are the different methods in achieving their benefits or harms that they're trying to sell in the round? Is that harm or benefit even important? Were they also then able to rebut the other teams and show engagement and some type of role fulfillment? These are things that you will then need to go back to the basics. And this is why I firmly believe that some of the best debaters and the best judges, they're not performing miracles. They're really just going back to the basics and being able to break down those basics with specificities and understanding what are the details that is needed to say why an argument is winning better than the others. So that's regarding Chapter 1 on how to view debates. Going into Chapter 2, which is how to track debates, i.e. taking notes of the round. I think it's important to note here that there are many different ways people track debates and many different ways that people take note of a debate, whether that is through your structure, through whether you prefer writing on a piece of paper or whether you prefer writing on your laptop. Sometimes people who are choosing to both write on a laptop may still end up tracking the debate very differently. So in no way is this lecture telling you that this is the only way to judge debates. This lecture does, however, aim to give you a foundation to work with to eventually then figure out what is the judging style that best suits you. So when it comes to note-taking and tracking a debate, it's really about understanding who said what exactly was being said, like, looking into the details, and eventually understanding how that argument plays out in the round. Okay, so who said it, what was said, how it was said. So when it comes to tracking that debate and understanding that this is why it's important, the first thing you want to do is understand what claims are being made by those debaters, right? So literally in your note, like if a debater says that this better helps an individual or a group to self-actualize, then that's probably what you want to write, as your claim. You don't have to write like word for word of what exactly is being said by debaters, because I don't expect you to be able to transcribe an entire speech. But I think it is important that even if to some extent you're writing in your own words, you are being mindful of changing the meaning of what the debater is actually saying. So yes, you can use your own shorthands in order to be able to write down the argument and the claim a lot faster, but try your best to reflect what is actually being said by that debater. So their claims and any rebuttals. The second thing you want to take note of is also looking at the unique reasonings that debaters are giving. So again, all that when I'm referring to like what claims debaters are making, I'm not just referring to arguments or points. I'm also referring to like rebuttals. I'm also referring to how they explain a model, or what is the framing that they've given, or what kind of like weighing they've given to the judge when it comes to meta debating out which issues are more of a priority than others. These are the claims that I'm referring to, and these are things that you should be taking note of. So it's not as simple as just thinking what is labeled as an argument by that debater and what is labeled a rebuttal by that debater. Okay, so we need to be a little bit more fair in understanding what is actually being said and what is the purpose of those things that are being said. So when you are looking at the unique reasonings for those claims, it is important to write down not only the analysis that you think is important, but also the ones that you think are unimportant, but debaters seem to be making it a big deal. Or even if you're unsure of the importance of the analysis, write it down. Why is it important that you write down all of this analysis, albeit not word for word, but to the best of your abilities, reflecting what is actually being said? Why is that important? For several reasons. The first is because you want to be able to weigh up those arguments and all that analysis in the bigger picture, like based on what are the eventual big questions that you're going to be looking at when you're deciding who is winning the debate. The second thing is for you to also understand role fulfillment, right? Like if you're evaluating closing half, you want to understand, is the positive material that's being presented actually unique in comparison to the opening half? Or is it rather reminiscent? Or is some parts of it new and some parts of it reminiscent, and to the part where is actually new, it's not really debate changing, therefore it's difficult for you to credit the closing half over the opening half? Or even looking at, were debaters in the closing half able to engage with what happened in opening half, even if the way they've engaged with it is not by analysis that has been explicitly labeled as rebuttals, but maybe via the analysis that has been used to prove why their extension is true, right? All of these things play a role in the debate. So in order for you to understand if a team actually did fulfill their role, then you would actually need to be able to look at the details. The third reason why it's important for you to keep track of these important details is because you want to be able to justify and participate in judge discussion better. So whether you are the chair or whether you are a panelist or even a trainee, right? You will be participating in the judge discussion. And how to show that you are able to give value in the discussion is not just by saying that, oh, you felt that this team was dismissive, but you need to be able to point out where exactly were they dismissive? Why was that particular issue that they were dismissive of worthy of you penalizing that particular team, right? And the only way for you to be able to justify this is if you are able to actually give more evidences, which is being able to point out where exactly in the speech. And as a chair, you should be able to furnish your panelists with this discussion because you are entrusted with the position of being chair to somewhat guide the discussion that is happening. So you do, in a way, have a higher responsibility of making sure that the discussion in judge deliberation is as accurate and as fair as possible, like giving every team a fair chance by making sure that you're crediting all teams for the details that they've provided in the round. And if you are a panelist, it's very likely that chairs want to understand your reason for decision better. Therefore, you will only be able to do that if you can provide them with the details. And same thing with trainee, right? Like in order for you to show that you are learning a lot more towards becoming a better judge, that you can provide reasonings for your decision and not just say if an argument was good or bad. And I think it's important to note here that pointing which part of the argument you want to reiterate during the judge deliberation doesn't just have to be for arguments that you want to criticize, but it can also be for arguments that you actually liked and the ones that you feel won the team the debate. So again, you will need to pinpoint exactly where do you think they were able to give that winning contribution. So that's in terms of like why it's important. And last but not least, of course, is that you're going to need to justify it to the debaters. If you are the chair, then odds are you're likely going to be the one giving the oral adjudication. You need to make it as understandable as possible. And then if you're a panelist, if you end up outvoting your chair, you will also likely be giving the oral adjudication, which means that you'll have to do the same thing, which is weed out all of the details and explain to the teams the reason for your decision. And even if you're a trainee, again, okay, chair, panelist, or trainee, all of these judges have valuable feedback to bring in the round. Debaters are probably going to ask you for personal feedback because they want to learn. So again, what would provide for a greater learning opportunity is not just by saying that you like their argument, but being able to pinpoint what exactly did that debater do with that argument that made it stand out for you and possibly made it debate winning. And same thing for constructive feedback on where you think that debater can better improve is by pinpointing that maybe the teams had a good premise and was able to explain why that premise is true, but then eventually leading to their impact, you're still not sure why that impact is true and how they were able to show the legwork of how the impact eventually manifests, right? Like that could be an example of where you will need to comb out the details to make debaters better understand how they can improve for the next coming rounds. So that's in terms of what to do when it comes to tracking debates and taking notes. Now moving on to chapter 3, which is giving your oral adjudication. So an oral adjudication is basically a compilation of the opinions of judges that eventually led to the call of the round. So this will more often than not be given by the chair of the round. However, if the chair is rolled and is being outvoted by the panelists, then it is likely that the panelists will end up giving the oral adjudication. What you need to acknowledge also is that when it comes to oral adjudication, there is no one structure that is the most correct way of going about things. But again, in this lecture, we're looking at some good foundations to be working off of. So I think the most suitable structure that would be helpful as a stepping stone is probably to enter back into the room after the deliberation and to start off by giving debaters the call of the round, right? I think that's important because a lot of the times when debaters are very anxious and they're not sure what the call is, you're making them like their state of mind not be in the best of position in order to fully grasp the kind of reasoning for your decision, right? Especially when they don't know what your decision is. So they can't really understand how this reasoning works. So the best thing to do is to give the call first and then to jump into other things. So go in the round, thank debaters for their hard work, and then explain how kind of give a little bit of an insight of what happened during judge deliberation. Say whether it was a very fruitful discussion where everybody considered all teams in the round, but this eventually led to the following call. Say the rankings, okay, and then after that go into general feedback. So general feedback is basically where you pinpoint some of the common mistakes or some of the common good things that teams/debaters were doing across the round. So that could mean you pointing out that debaters were not as engaging as they could have been. There was a lack of POI. Teams could have benefited from a lot more characterization. Teams could have benefited out of a lot more explanation of their worldview or their model. Like, that's a fair common mistake that teams tend to make in rounds, and it's fair for you to point as like a general feedback. So this is more of like you not necessarily going into like specifics, and you can say, this is my general feedback. I will go into more details as we eventually give the justification for the rankings. And again, you don't only need to say what the common mistakes of teams are. You can also say what the common good things have been as well, right? Things like you really appreciated how teams had a high level of engagement, or how stylistic everybody was in the room, that made it so enjoyable for you to listen to, right? I think that these things are still worth a shout out for debaters, because they are good observations that you have about what happened in the round. And then right at the end, you can encourage debaters and tell them, please approach any one of us, the chair or the panelist or the trainee, for any personal feedback. We'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions. It would also be helpful if you can outline to the teams what is about to happen in this oral adjudication, right? So that means when you're done deliberating, you're done submitting your ballot, right, and you're ready for the OA, you get back into the room, you tell the debaters, thank you, here's how I'm going to structure my OA. Number 1, I'm going to give you the call. Number 2, some general feedback. Number 3, justifications for the call. And then please, if anybody has any questions, we can do so after the oral adjudication, because we would highly encourage everybody to approach any one of us for personal feedback. So set the tone so that debaters understand. If debaters are asking you questions in between and interrupting you, you can respectfully tell them that I understand this question. I will actually answer it in my second issue of why this team won over this other team. Or, tell them, thank you so much for the question. Let me just finish my reason for decision, and then I'll eventually address the question you have. Just to kind of, I think, be fair to them. I think it's very fair if debaters have questions, and I think it is going to be very helpful that judges can answer those questions. But it's still important that you maintain order as well of what's happening in the round, because you don't want to lose control over being able to justify your decision and then get involved in this second version of what the debate is, with debaters saying, but didn't I say this? Didn't I say that? I mean, they probably might still do that during personal feedback, but at least you've done your best in explaining the reason for your call and was able to give it fair time in order to do that. So that's pretty much it in terms of Judging 101. Again, I would highly encourage you to also look out for other ways to judge, but I do think that this lecture gives a good foundation for a lot of beginner and intermediate judges to work off of. And wishing you guys the best of luck. I think that this video could also be helpful for debaters to understand what kind of mindset the judges have when they're entering into the debate. But either way, debater or judge, I'm wishing everybody the best for the tournament. Bye.